Hi, my name is TERKIMBI TIZA, and you're welcome to Simple Truth Station. Today on Simple Truth Station, we're going to be learning on In Pursuit of Purpose, a series that is going to be broken into 4 parts. And for today's episode, we're learning on imposter syndrome and how to deal with it. A couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation with one of my young men in church, and while we're discussing, I was commending him on the quality of service he offered on our social media page. And while I was doing that, the young man kept deflecting. I was curious as to why he was, you know, running away from the compliments I was giving him. He kept avoiding it and saying, no, sir, no, sir. And he was really serious. And I said in my heart, this is one of the symptoms of imposter syndrome. So, what is imposter syndrome? Imposter syndrome is a psychological situation or state where high achievers run away or deflect from their achievements or their potentials because they fear that they may be exposed as frauds. In simpler terms, high achievers think that they are less or think less of themselves whenever they are complimented or commended for what they do. They are afraid that one day they will be discovered as a fraud for, all of the times that people have complimented them. And I'm sure that somebody listening to me now may actually realize that they're suffering from what we call imposter syndrome. You're always afraid of being identified with greatness. You try to hide behind the scenes whenever people talk about how good you are with what you do. And essentially, imposter syndrome is powered by fear. Do you know that interestingly, statistics shows that most people who suffer with imposter syndrome actually are as great as people think they are? In fact, I have this to say, and it may be a bold claim. I can say that most people who are celebrated are not as great as those who are behind the scenes, because it is not what you can do that you are celebrated for. It is actually what you do. And courage rewards people, not taking the back scene or sitting behind the stage. It is more common than we think. Imposter syndrome, right? It's more common in the world than we think. I think statistics shows that up to 70 to 80% of people suffer from imposter syndrome. When I discovered this, I was really shocked because before, when I also went through or suffered imposter syndrome, I thought it was peculiar to me. I just thought there was something about me that was, meek, this innate meekness that didn't want to do things and be appreciated for the things that I did. But I discovered that it was more common in people. Guess what? Interestingly, there are characters in the Bible who suffered this thing or this same fate too. Take, for example, someone like Joshua. You see, God called Joshua at the end of Moses' life and ministry. And he says, Joshua, I want you to fill in the shoes of Moses, my servant. Joshua chapter 1. An interesting thing took place. From the on the offset, it doesn't look as though, or it didn't look as though Joshua had imposter syndrome because he was not stated in the Bible. But when you read the conversation that played out in Joshua 1, you discover that actually what was going on was a self-doubt. Self-doubt was manifesting because 3 good times God had to assure Joshua that he could do what God was asking him to do. He kept saying, be strong and courageous. Verse 5. Be strong and courageous. Verse 6. He says in verse 9, have I not said? It almost seemed like God was angry, shouting, listen, be strong and courageous. Now, if you're in Joshua's shoes, of course you'll be tense. You feel like, man, if I take on these things, people will perceive me as a fraud because I cannot feel in the shoes of Moses, such a great guy, such a mighty man who did exceptional things by God. But what Joshua didn't know was that Moses was not great by himself. Moses was great because God was helping him. In fact, the way the text starts, and I want to read it, Joshua 1:1, it starts by saying, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, my servant Moses is dead. Now, therefore, go over the Jordan with my people and the land which I'm giving them, the children of Israel. And it says in verse 5, no man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. So from the onset, God was already assuring Joshua that it's not about how great you are. It is because I helped Moses. And so because I helped Moses, if I help you, you'll be as great as Moses. But you cannot blame Joshua because all of these times Joshua was fighting, but he was under the shadow of Moses. And most times, that's what imposter syndrome does. When we start to see that the stakes are high, we want to hide from public scrutiny and we fear, especially, failure. Right? Before I go on with everything I have to say, let me just highlight a few things or signs of imposter syndrome. One of the leading signs of imposter syndrome is consistent doubt. When you find yourself in a state of doubt, especially when people have good things to say about what you do and what you can do and who you are, then you're probably suffering from imposter syndrome. You know, Joshua, the example we use, was already leading the children of Israel to fight battles while Moses was older. But you see, he would never have thought that he would be a great leader like Moses because Moses was present. And that's how many people who deal with imposter syndrome think. Maybe God is speaking to you about a project. Maybe you know from the things that you do that you can be more, you can see more, you can become more, especially in the pursuit of purpose. I mean, your friends, your neighbors have been nudging you that this thing can be scaled up to a global level, but you're hiding from what people will think. I'm here to tell you that what you're going through is imposter syndrome. So that's one of the number two. You're always relieved whenever you're done with a major project. So you are happier when you finish than when you start. For some people, they're always excited to start something new. But people who have to deal with imposter syndrome are always scared of trying something new because they think that it will expose them, as I said, as a fraud. And of course, the third sign of imposter syndrome is a high sense of fear for failure, which also drives many people to strive for perfectionism. And when they seek for perfectionism and the need to be perfectionist, it hinders their drive to even do or try or let out the work that they do. I've met some creatives who produce a lot of videos, a lot of stuff, and they're afraid to set it out. They're afraid to let it out because they think that it's not good enough and people criticize them. In our modern society and modern culture, it is true that it doesn't have to be too good. It doesn't have to be too great. Some people out there are living and waiting for your own voice, for your own gift, for your own manifestation. Of course, not everybody will love what you do, but I can tell you that there's a large number of people waiting for you to do what you do. And you know the honest truth, fear is a thief. Fear is a thief. Fear will rob you of more than boldness will. The world celebrates the bold, but those who are fearful will most times miss their kairos moments. Imagine for a second, Joseph, when he was summoned to stand before Potiphar, had self-doubt. He wouldn't have spoken confidently. He wouldn't have given the suggestion that opened the door for him to come to the palace. Because many people don't pay attention to the story so much. If you critically examine it, you'll discover that Joseph was the one who suggested, after interpreting the dream, is that somebody should be placed in charge of the economy of the state. And then Pharaoh said, who else but you? So he opened the door for himself. If he had self-doubt that he couldn't interpret the dreams, he wouldn't have risen as he rose. So it's possible that more doors are shutting against you because you are dealing with imposter syndrome. The question somebody who is watching me now will be asking is, so what do I do? How do I deal with imposter syndrome? Number one, you need to change the lens with which you see failure through. The greatest problem with most people who suffer from imposter syndrome is failure. They fear failure. So you stop seeing failure as a death sentence. Rather, start to see failure as a learning curve, an opportunity to know a better way to do things. In this world that we live in today, we now know that people can pay to learn from your failure. People are wiser now. They don't want to learn by their experience anymore. People don't want to put their fingers to know that fire can burn. They want to learn from whose hands have been burnt. So you can even sell courses. I'm just joking, but you can sell courses on how not to do what you are doing. There are people in this world today, I dare say, that they are more popular, they're richer, more successful in purpose and destiny just because they are bold. So you must change your lenses. Failure is not a death sentence. Say it after me. Write in the comment section whatever you can do to retain this statement. Failure is not a death sentence. And if you're a believer listening to me, you must put on the cloak of meekness. Like Joshua. Joshua had to come to the place where he was forced to recognize that it was not about his ability. It's not about his capacity. It's about the one that is backing him, the one that is helping him. So meekness forces you to always recognize God, to always depend on him, to always call him for help. And if you recognize that it's not about you, but about the help of God, then you'll not be concerned as much about failure because you know you are not riding alone, you're riding with people. And then, thirdly, you need to consider honest feedback. I'm sure you have one or two good friends who will never lie to you. Have you ever watched some of these music shows? When you check some people's acts, you know that they don't have good friends because they didn't counsel them. But if you have good friends who can be sincere with you, then maybe you should take their word and just give it a try. Try on a small scale. Review what you have done and be honest with yourself. Give yourself some space. Pat yourself on the back a little because you tried, right? And then interact with other products and people who do things like you do. And if you do that, you may soon see that you fit in more than you think or assume. And last but not least, of course, you must keep praying. Imposter syndrome, one of the things it produces in people is anxiety. Of course, if you're afraid, you'll be anxious. And the Bible commends us that we should be anxious for nothing, but in all things, with prayer and thanksgiving, make our request known to God, and He will give us peace. So if you want peace and confidence to do the things you ought to do, always pray. I want to thank you for giving me time out of your quality time to share this simple truth. I hope to see you next time. Please make sure you subscribe, like, share this post, and let somebody know what you have known today. Until we see again, God bless you. Have a great day.